Nothing foreshadowed trouble on this spring day, May 7, 2003, Russia, Rostov region. The sun was shining gently outside. Fruit trees were blooming everywhere, and it seemed that nature itself was rejoicing in this fine day. It would be a shame not to celebrate together on a day like this. The large Mazy family decided to organize a gathering in honor of the Mansky family. The doors in their private house were never locked, because someone was always coming and going, either bringing in or taking out groceries or prepared food. They held the feast in the yard under the blooming cherry tree, surrounded by noise, commotion, and anticipation for the celebration. The neighbor boy, Romka, also dropped by to see what was going on. The guest, squinting with pleasure, asked, "Oh, what smells so good here? You can smell it all the way down the street." Everyone in the area knew Roman and his family. His relatives worked at the Shakhtinsk correctional colony and were well respected among the locals. Roma's mother couldn't have a child for a long time. It seemed like a cruel fate was haunting their family. All the babies inevitably died at birth, so the desperate woman had already buried 5. Even Romka's twin brother died at birth, so Romochka was the long-awaited child in the family, cherished and adored by everyone. Well, that's how it always seemed from the outside. The boy graduated from the local school quite well, and then he entered UNIK. For a couple of years, Roman studied in another city, at Rostov State University, but he wasn't able to get his diploma. Either he was expelled for something, or he left on his own. The neighbors didn't know for sure, and Roma's mother wasn't talkative. But now, the 22-year-old guy was hanging around doing nothing, and in fact was a freeloader living off his parents. The Mazy family was aware of the neighbor boy's freeloading, so they decided to invite him over for a meal as a neighborly gesture. There was plenty of food anyway, enough for everyone, and the guy was always polite, quiet, and made a good impression. They'd known him since childhood and watched him grow up, so they were comfortable inviting him into their home and yard. Besides, everyone here is local, not strangers. The youngest member of the Mazy family, Sasha, was 6 years old, and he was bored with the adults, so after picking at something on his plate, he quickly ran off to play. After a while, the young neighbor Roman, who had dropped by, also got ready to go home. "Thank you, everything was very tasty. I should probably get going, I've already taken advantage of your hospitality." Roma got up from the table and politely took his leave, while outside it was getting dark. The women started clearing the table, the men continued their lively conversation and drinking, when suddenly the family idyll was interrupted by a loud shout from the street. "Seryoga, some guy is taking your Sashka into the woods and you're watching Strashnota on the channel. And the story I'm going to tell today is almost entirely based on the words and accounts of direct eyewitnesses." Natalia Mazy heard the sound of breaking dishes. Her mother immediately felt unwell. She barely managed to pull herself together to run after her husband, who had rushed out. Other neighbors were already outside, including Roman's parents. Altogether, they ran toward the forest belt, where, according to one of the neighbors, someone had taken 6-year-old Sasha. "Sasha! Little Sasha!" Natalia shouted at the top of her lungs, hoping her son would hear and respond, but the only answer was dead silence. All night long, the entire Mazy family, together with the neighbors, searched for the boy, but they couldn't find him. The local police also joined the search, but it was still unsuccessful. After the unsuccessful search, the police officers finally decided to question the relatives of the missing in detail. Politely, but very insistently, the police officer asked the parents, "Tell me in the smallest detail where and under what circumstances you last saw Samusanta." It was painful to look at Natalia, Sasha's mother, who was missing. She was on the verge of fainting, and her face, from grief, seemed to have immediately become gaunt and aged. The police officers realized that they wouldn't get anything from the grieving mother right now, so they turned their attention to the father. He cleared his throat and awkwardly started his sorrowful story. "We were all sitting at the table. Sashka was with us. He sat at the table for a bit at first, and then he ran off to play. He never went far. He played in the yard or near the house. And in the evening he was also playing near the house, the investigator clarified with the father. Yes, probably, Sergei continued to recall, and a heavy crease appeared on his face. There were a lot of guests. There wasn't much space for him here, so he could have gone out the gate to run around with the local kids or ride his bike. You say you had a lot of guests, but were there any strangers among them? No, they were all relatives, Sergei replied, not understanding what all these questions were for, or how they could help. While searching for the missing son, the neighbor's son Romka entered and suddenly recalled Natalia's mother-in-law bustling around. That's your grandson's friend, go after him too. He's an overgrown loafer, got kicked out of college, wanders around, now he's here doing nothing, can't find his place. He's 22 years old and still living off his parents. Was this Roman with you when the boy disappeared? No, Natalia suddenly jumped up. Romka, he left earlier than everyone else. And about half an hour later, another neighbor came running, shouting that some man had taken our Sasha into the woods. I see, I see. And when you and the neighbors were looking for Sasha, did Roman also go to search for the boy? I don't know. I didn't see him, Sergei replied. I wasn't paying attention because of all the commotion. Everyone was on edge, so I couldn't think about the neighbors. The detective stepped aside and spoke quietly to his colleagues. We need to bring this neighbor in and have a good talk with him. The morning of May 8th came. The search for the boy still hadn't led to anything, and the hope of finding him alive was fading with every minute. The police crossed the street and knocked on the neighbor's door. Maisie. Open up, the owner, shouted the local district officer, who was also helping with the search. The lights came on in the house, and after a while, the head of the family, Vyacheslav, came outside. What happened? Did you find Sasha? He asked anxiously. No, we haven't found him, Uncle Slav. Please call Roma if he's home. Of course he's home. Where else would he be? In a hurry? Vyacheslav muttered and shouted into the house. Lilia, call Romka. The district officer wants to talk to him. A couple of minutes later, a tall, dark-haired young man appeared in the doorway. He was nervously shifting his large brown eyes from one person to another, standing on the threshold of his house. Roman Vyacheslavovich? The detective asked. Yes, the young man replied quietly. Come with us. We need to ask you a couple of questions. Ask them here, Roman replied, shrinking into himself and mentally seeking protection from his parents. This place isn't suitable for a heart-to-heart conversation, the district officer replied firmly. If you don't come willingly, then we'll have to detain you until things are clarified. Wait, what's going on? The father interrupted the conversation. Are you suspecting something? Our boy isn't here yet, the district officer replied evasively. But the more he resists, and the more you interfere, the more reason we'll have to doubt his innocence. It's better to clear everything up right away, and not return to this issue again. We are required to question everyone who was near the scene that evening. Such an explanation seemed quite logical to Roma's parents, and they did not try to prevent his trip to the police station. Roman stayed silent during the trip and stared blankly at one spot in the office. Rom, will you stay silent or finally say something? The officer asked. I have nothing to tell you, the guy replied, still staring off into space. Did you see the neighbor's boy, Sasha, last night when he was born? The Maisie family's yard? At the mention of the missing child, Roman suddenly shuddered all over, and this could not go unnoticed. Dozens of eyes were now staring at him intently. Everyone understood that the guy was hiding something. He swallowed nervously and squirmed in his chair. The detectives realized that they needed to keep pressing the suspect, although at first they thought that for some reason he was covering for the real criminal. Did you hear that Sashka Maisie disappeared yesterday? Again? The detective asked. Roma looked at him fearfully, but remained silent. The parents deserve to know what happened to their son, the officer added. They have earned that right. Roman looked down, but the policeman kept pressing. Just think about it. If something happened to you, your mother would want to know what happened to you. Or is it better to leave her completely in the dark and make her suffer forever in doubt and guesses? Maybe Sasha is still alive and waiting to be rescued. Right now, every minute counts. Roman glanced at the detectives with his brown eyes. For a while he was silent, as if gathering his thoughts, and then suddenly whispered, "No, I'm not waiting for him." Everyone present fell silent at once, as if stunned by this news. No one expected to hear it like that. Finally, the senior operative forced out, "Where is he? In the forest belt? I covered him with branches and dirt." "I'll show you," Roman replied. Driving to the indicated place with the arrested man, the police officers were afraid of what awaited them there, but what they discovered turned out to be even more horrifying. Under a layer of earth and branches lay the outstretched and mutilated body of a 6-year-old boy. The child was undressed, and his entire abdomen was a bloody mess, as if he had been mauled by stray dogs. But before the police arrived, the body had not been dug up, so it wasn't done by animals. The police officers could barely restrain themselves from strangling the man standing next to them with a vacant look in his eyes. There wasn't a drop of regret or an ounce of sympathy in his eyes, and the police officers still had to somehow tell the parents about everything. But how can you tell or show something like that to the relatives? During the investigation, it turned out that Roman took the neighbor boy's life just a few steps away from where his parents found him. The constant risk of being caught only motivated him more. He abused the boy, took his life by squeezing his hands around his throat, and then mocked the body to his heart's content. But even that wasn't enough for him. After everything he had done, he sank his teeth into the still warm flesh of the child and began gnawing on his body like a real cannibal. The blood on his lips and metallic taste in his mouth excited Yemelyansev even more. Roman completely lost control and tore at the boy's body like a wild beast. By the time the body was found, the child's entire abdomen and groin were badly lacerated by teeth. The examination confirmed that these injuries were inflicted post-mortem by a human, not by an animal. During the investigation, Roman confessed to several more killings. First, the homeless women at the Shakhtinsky cemetery in February 2003, and then Misha Rashchepkin, who was 7 years old in February 2002. Both boys, Misha and Sasha, went with Roman voluntarily. He lured Misha to the construction site by offering to collect scrap metal together, promising him money for it, and he promised Sasha to show him a puppy, asking the boy to help feed it. Especially Sasha, who had seen Yemelyansev before, so they had no reason to distrust him. At first, none of the locals believed that it was the quiet neighbor boy who took Sasha's life. That's exactly what saved him from being lynched by the people. Roma Yemelyansev, who lived next door, seemed far too harmless to everyone, but it was him. Besides, the situation was further complicated by the fact that Misha's own father was already serving a 12-year sentence for taking someone's life. This raises the question of the immediate introduction of the death penalty and the infallibility of verdicts. The killing of Rashchepkin was solved right away. The alcoholic father, suffering from a hangover after a 2-week drinking binge, confessed to taking the life himself, naturally under pressure from the police and under the influence of alcohol. And the wife, also an alcoholic who hadn't yet sobered up, confirmed as well, saying that her husband often beat the children. So this time, he lost control and beat the youngest to death, and then cut off his son's genitals to cover his tracks and confuse the investigation. And no one was bothered by the fact that the boy wasn't just beaten, but also abused, and only then killed by suffocation, stabbed with a knife, and then his body was mocked for a long time. After cutting off his genitals, they even tried to burn the body. No one ever asked him why a father would do all this to his own son. And the fact that the man withdrew his testimony in court didn't really bother the judge. He didn't go into details either, but he still sent the case back to the prosecutor's office for further investigation. But there, they didn't see any grounds to acquit Rashchepkin. and after tweaking the materials again and removing all the inconsistencies, they sent it back to court, and this time the judge didn't object. It was much easier to convict the chronic alcoholic Alexander Rashchepkin, who had neither a reliable alibi nor a good lawyer, than to look for the real criminal and figure out who was right and who was guilty in this terrible case. Meanwhile, there were a lot of inconsistencies in the case of Misha's death, and it was literally held together with white thread. For example, the expert somehow didn't notice the marks of hands on Misha's neck at first, and the initial cause of death was listed as a head injury. And for some reason, the report also kept silent about the molestation, even though Misha's father didn't confess to it, even under pressure from the investigation. He only answered the question about the severed genitals, saying that he didn't remember why he did it, and suggested that maybe it was to confuse the police. The father couldn't recall exactly what he used. He allegedly killed his son but kept confusing whether it was a vase or a hammer. And the testimony of eyewitnesses who said they saw the boy on the day he died in the company of a young man at a store near his home was not taken into account by the police at all. By the time the case reached court, Rashchepkin's wife, drinking buddies, and eldest son, all of them, claimed that Misha was beaten to death by his own father, and one of the friends even said that he helped carry the body to the construction site, for which, by the way, he later paid with 2 years in a penal colony. That's why the people of Shakti, knowing very well how the city police work, seriously doubted that this time they had caught the real murderer. Many thought at the time that they'd just pin it on the first person they found again, and only Roman's mother knew that no one was falsely accusing her son. She learned about her child's unhealthy tendencies when he was still little. Back then, he broke a kitten's neck right in front of her. But instead of being horrified by what he'd done, the woman, to her horror, saw immense pleasure on the child's face. Since then, she expected something like that to happen every day, so she even took the child to the famous psychiatrist Bukhanovsky, who once interviewed Chikatilo. By the way, there's a video about him on the Strashnota channel. The child underwent anonymous treatment with him under the pseudonym Igor Elizarov. But when he became an adult, Roman decided that he no longer needed medication or constant supervision, so he stopped visiting the Phoenix clinic. This was the turning point that led to him becoming a criminal. Without medication and proper psychiatric help, Yemelyansev was left alone with his inner demons, and eventually they completely took over him. His mother hid his treatment at a private psychiatric clinic from everyone, even from her husband. Roman, being a naturally intelligent person, did not show aggression in public, so there was no reason to suspect him. As a result, Yemelyansev's mental illness was only discovered during the investigation. Roman's medical history, including records of his visits to a private clinic, appears in the criminal case files at the request of his lawyer. Roman hoped to avoid criminal liability, and that's why he told his lawyer about his visits to a psychiatrist in childhood. It turned out that after stopping treatment at Phoenix, Roman's psycho-emotional state became unstable, which greatly affected not only his well-being, but also his academic performance. As a result, the once exemplary student of the economics faculty at Riga Stradinch University was expelled, and soon after that, his beloved girlfriend left him as well. Upset and left to his own devices, Yemelyansev wandered around the city, preferring secluded places like parks and old cemeteries. The latter attracted him the most. His unhealthy fascination with dead bodies had appeared long ago. Back when he was a teenager, he started digging up fresh graves. And when he was expelled from college, he tried to get a job at the city morgue to be closer to the objects of his desire. But getting into such a lucrative place wasn't easy, so the most accessible option remained: free trips to the cemetery. Lilia Yemelyanseva couldn't help but notice her son's condition, but she didn't report Roman's tendencies to anyone. Bukhanovsky immediately told her that without treatment, her son would become a maniac. But for some reason, the mother didn't take any action after her son refused treatment. At that time in Phoenix, details about the anonymous report and the private clinic weren't shared. The Yemelyansev family also faced difficulties. The child who was so longed for by his mother turned out, in reality, not to be so needed, at least by his father. The father beat Roma more than once, and when he was 9, as a result of the beatings, he suffered a severe head injury, which affected his mental state even more. It was at this age that the boy started playing disturbing games, torturing and killing animals, and by the time he was 12, his mother took him to Bukhanovsky's clinic. Notably, even as a child, Roma would draw his maniacal fantasies during therapy at Phoenix. Among the drawings depicting those he wanted to kill were a boy and a homeless woman. At the same time, Yemelyansev remained absolutely calm despite his early awareness of his desire to kill and torture people. Even the judges were amazed by his cold-bloodedness and composure. When Sasha's relatives finally realized that it was really their young neighbor who had taken the boy's life, they literally begged the police and prosecutors to hand Romantsev over to them for vigilante justice. People didn't want to wait for the verdict, especially since no one knew what it would be. But as much as the police officers themselves wanted to strangle the maniac with their own hands, they had to restrain both themselves and the victim's relatives. The family later swore that they would get even with the maniac no matter what it cost them. Little Sasha was buried in a closed coffin. His mother was almost carried at the cemetery. She couldn't walk on her own because of the tranquilizers. There was not only crying at the cemetery, but also terrible wailing. Relatives, close friends, and acquaintances cried, and the wailing stopped only when the priest started the funeral service. Sasha's mother and father could not cope with his death. Natalia began to sing out of grief, no longer seeing any meaning in this worthless life that can so easily take away what is most precious to you. And her husband soon left and started a new family, where he had another child, this time a daughter. But even there, he was unable to find simple human happiness. On the night of July 29, 2025, his entire family, himself, his wife, and their teenage daughter, died in a terrible accident near the city of Oksay on the M4 Don highway. They were returning home from the sea after a summer vacation. By the way, you can find similar news on the Telegram channel strashno.twy. Subscribe. So the evil fate that haunted the Maisy family did not stop with just one child. If you want even more videos, check out Boosty. If you're from Russia, use Boosty, and if you're not from Russia, use Patreon. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube. The links are below the video. Despite Yemelyansev's confession, on April 25, 2004, he was initially convicted only for taking the life of Sasha Maisy and the attempted murder of a homeless woman. Her body was never found, so the investigation concluded Roman didn't kill her, and that after regaining consciousness, the homeless woman didn't report it and just ran away. And only in October 2008 was Yemelyansev also convicted for the brutal murder of Misha Rashchepkin and for committing sexual acts against him. All this time, up until 2007, an innocent man, Alexander Rashchepkin, was in prison. The system clearly protects its own until the end. To free Rashchepkin, it was necessary to bring criminal charges against the police officers who forced a confession out of him. Only the small fry ended up facing the hammer of justice. It was the ordinary detectives, while the main culprits, the prosecutor's investigator, the city prosecutor, and the judge, of course, stayed out of it. They got off scot-free, but in the end, it is exactly them who are responsible for bringing an innocent person to criminal liability. Instead of an apology from the prosecutor, rehabilitation, and compensation for 5 years of wrongful imprisonment, Alexander Rashchepkin received only humiliation in prison, health problems, and ended up homeless. For a couple of years, people in Shakhty saw Rashchepkin wandering around the city dumps, and then he disappeared somewhere, and no one knows where he is now. Meanwhile, Roman Emeliantsev calmly served his sentence in solitary confinement at the Novocherkassk Correctional Colony, and in May 2020 he returned safe and sound to his hometown of Shakhty, where he continued to live in a private house on Shkedenko Street. The maniac led a secluded lifestyle. Too many people in this city remembered what he had done 17 years ago. But despite the fact that the news about the release and return of the cruel maniac to the city quickly spread online and throughout Shakhty, no one was in a hurry to avenge those whose lives had been taken. 17 years is a long time. Even the youngest witnesses of those events now had their own families, so no one was in a hurry to give up their freedom or risk the safety of their loved ones for a moment of satisfaction from blood vengeance. Emeliantsev soon settled into the city, even got himself a girlfriend, and found a job at one of the gas stations. His mental state did not improve during his time in prison, of course, so he constantly needed the help of the prison psychiatrist, even while incarcerated. After his release, at the insistence of the supervising inspector, he registered at the Shakhty Psychoneurological Clinic, and after a year of observation, the local psychiatrists smugly claimed that Emeliantsev was completely cured, and that no unhealthy tendencies were found in him. And how wrong they were, because this story has a continuation. But in general, as for the participants, Sasha and Misha, they are the embodiment of absolute trust and defenselessness. Both of them willingly followed an acquaintance, a guy who took advantage of their naivety, luring them with promises of collecting scrap metal for money for puppies, to see them, to feed them. Dying at the hands of someone they considered their own highlights the monstrosity of the betrayal committed by Emeliantsev. The victims' families, especially the Mazys, saw their entire world collapse. Natalia, Sasha's mother, never recovered. She began drinking and was overcome by grief. Her husband Sergei, trying to start a new life, eventually died along with his new family, which creates a sense of doom haunting this family. Alexander Roshchepkin, the wrongfully convicted father, became another victim of the system. He clearly and vividly demonstrates how the system destroys lives without bearing any responsibility for it. The key figure, whose inaction became one of the factors in the tragedy, is Roman's mother, Lilia. She had known about her son's sadistic tendencies since childhood. She tried to get him treated, but she also kept the secret of his illness even from her husband. And she took no measures to force him to get treatment or to inform the authorities, even though Bukhanovsky directly warned that he would become a maniac without treatment. Her passivity proved fatal. Well, I won't even mention the law enforcement and justice system. It appears here as a mechanism focused on simple, false solutions. The Roshchepkin's case was completely fabricated. No motive, conflicting testimonies, witness statements that the boy was seen with an unknown young man. All of this was ignored, as was the father's retraction of his confession, and the prosecutor's office, after cleaning up the case files, secured a conviction. As for the novel itself, it's a classic case of the formation of a serial killer with sadistic and necrophilic tendencies. His personality was shaped by several key factors, the first being a biological and psychological predisposition. Even as a child, he took pleasure in causing suffering and taking the lives of animals, which indicates a deep disorder. The second factor is the family environment. He was a long-awaited child, but unloved by his father. Beatings from his father led to a traumatic brain injury at the age of 9, which worsened his mental condition. The third factor is the lack of consistent and compulsory treatment. Being cunning and smart, he underwent therapy as a teenager, where he literally depicted his future victims in his drawings. He committed his crimes with extreme cruelty, which may indicate an obsession with violence, even in court and in prison. He was striking for his cold-bloodedness and ability to manipulate, pretending to be normal in front of audiences to gain his freedom. And his end was logical. In the end, this story is a textbook example of how tragedy is born at the intersection of several factors. The perpetrator's severe mental disorder, the passivity and fear of his family, who knew about the danger but did not prevent it, and the flaws of a system that preferred to convict an innocent person. The case of Hmelyansev shows that some individuals carry an irreparable defect within themselves. Social institutions often lack effective tools for timely identification, control, and neutralization of such individuals, which leads to irreversible consequences. And so, in the end, Hmelyansev was released. He returned to the mines, and it seemed like he was normal, but upon closer inspection, of course, it turned out to be completely different. Police officers closely monitored the former convict, and in 2021 it was discovered that he had become addicted to substances. Hmelyansev was detained for the administrative report and a dose was found on him. As a result, on July 29, 2021, the Shakhtinsky City Court sentenced him to 3 years and 9 months in prison for illegal acquisition and possession in large quantities. During the personal search, he had results besides substances and some of his personal belongings, including a smartphone. The contents of the browser made the inspectors shudder. Despite the assurances of psychiatrists who declared Hmelyansev sane in 2020, his interests didn't go away. He just turned out to be much more cunning and possibly smarter than the doctors. He told them exactly what they wanted to hear, and the valiant doctors soothed their conscience and those around them with tales of the patient's complete recovery from tendencies dangerous to society. But if the psychiatrists had shown proper vigilance and competence, there would definitely have been grounds to isolate the released criminal. Hmelyansev simply lay low and waited for the right moment. That's exactly why he didn't appeal the court's verdict, despite the fact that rumors were spreading in the city about substances being planted on the maniac. Lilia Hmelyantseva, Roma's mother, also stated this during his trial on charges of use and possession. But her son stopped her, saying that he should be in prison, as he was already back in the colony. In 2022, Roman signed a contract with the private military company and went to the front line in the winter of 2023. Hmelyansev was killed in action somewhere in the Luhansk region, but not everyone considered the actions of Hmelyansev and other maniacs to be immoral. Back when Roman was serving his first sentence, a public fan group with a separate page appeared for him on VK. They posted poems written by the maniac himself, which he sent to one of the admins in private messages. And girls wrote enthusiastic comments and promised to wait for his return from prison. After the public outrage, the group was made private, but anyone could join it just by submitting a request. And what do you think about this case? Write comments, leave likes or dislikes, and watch other videos on the channel while they're still available.